This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I don't know about up here, but in Tico this morning, we woke up to more snow, 27 degrees. And it's like, no, spring is supposed to be here, not winter. So it stopped by the time we got up to Latah, but it's still the fact that it was there. It's not supposed to be there. Snow's supposed to be gone. But anyway, it's great to have weather. It's not like down in Texas where it's 70 and 80 and 90 degrees already. Give me my spring. Well, this morning we are going to continue our study of miracles. Our middle daughter, Crystal, when she was growing up, when she was real young, she was trying to be very self-dependent. And you'd go in and you try to get her dressed for Sunday morning or whatever, and it's like, me do. You know, and you'd go to put her shoes on her, it's like, me do, and she'd pull her foot away, me do. You know, everything, just, I got to do it myself, me do. And, you know, how many of us are that way? We're that way maybe growing up, or that way as an adult, you know, and when we have problems in our life, we don't want anybody else's help. We want to have that me-do attitude. I can handle it. I'm an adult. You know, well, sometimes we need to let go and let God. You know, we need to let God help us in our struggles. We need to get down on our knees and pray to God to help us. It's not something that we can do on our own. And we're going to study about that this morning in our second parable. We'll get to that in a few minutes. This morning in our list, again, the list is on the back table if you don't have one. We'll be looking at miracle number 11 in that list. Jesus raises a widow's son from the dead in Nain. You can find that in Luke 7. As you can see, the only book that carries that one. And then number 12 will be Jesus calms a storm on the Sea of Galilee. And we'll be reading that in Matthew 8, Mark 4, and Luke 8. Before we get into them, I just want to give you an idea of where we'll be at this morning. Of course, we have been talking up here in Capernaum, and there it goes. Capernaum, up at the top end of the Sea of Galilee, is where Jesus has been performing a lot of his miracles. Well, today he's going to be walking all the way down here to Nain. So according to Google Maps, that is almost a 30-mile journey. And it can take about 11 hours to walk that. So it is doable in a one-day's journey, as we're going to read that Jesus does that. He's actually got a real full day today that we're going to read about, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, it's about a 30-mile journey that Jesus is going to be taking. So looking at number 11, starting in Luke 7, verses 11 through 17. Now it happened the day after that he went into the city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. Now Luke is the only gospel writer to record this miracle. The answer to the question of why is pure speculation. Maybe he was the only writer who was there during this time. Okay? We don't know, and again, it doesn't matter to the story why Luke is the only one that does that. So Luke records it as the day after. The day after what? Again, we don't know for sure. It could be the day after miracle number 10, the healing of the man in the synagogue with the withered hand. The commentary that I am reading refers to it as the day after the centurion's servant was healed, because in Matthew 7, 1 through 10, that's what he records. But again, when we're looking at it in chronological order, that was not in order, going from 1 through 10, and then now again 11 through 17. So again, it doesn't really matter what this day after is that they're referring to, but they do list it. Going on in verse 12. Let me read something else. Again, it doesn't matter what was happening the day before. We see here that Jesus is not alone in his travels to Nain. Many of his disciples are following him, as are a large crowd of normal people, people who have not decided to follow Jesus, but they are intrigued enough that they are following him to see what's going to happen next, what kind of miracles he's going to perform. Okay? So he has a crowd following him on that long 11-hour journey from Capernaum all the way down here to Nain. So let's continue on in verse 12. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd had gathered, had come from the city and was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. Now, there should be two thought patterns that we have about this miracle of Jesus. The first is he performs a miracle as he is confronted with the sick in his daily travels. He's traveled down to Nain. Just so happens this procession of this funeral procession, as we would call it, is coming out of the city. Just coincidence. And if we look at that, it's like, well, here's a paralytic, I'll heal that person. Here's a man who's demon possessed, I'll cast out that demon. And it's just what we might call willy-nilly. He sees somebody and he heals them. The other aspect, the second aspect that we look at is this is all inspired. There is a purpose to what he is doing. In other words, he has walked this day's journey, this 30 miles down to Nain for this one purpose, for this one miracle. And he's got to be there at this specific time in order for this to all work. Okay? And that's how I look at it. Jesus didn't walk all the way down there this day's journey just because. He had a purpose in the miracles that he worked. Okay? So the meeting, they come outside. He gets up to the city just as this funeral procession is coming out. And so you have the meeting of these two crowds. The commentary that I'm reading puts it this way. The meeting of these two crowds outside the city of Nain must have been impressive. And as they met, life triumphed over death, and sorrow was turned into joy. One procession was grief-stricken, for it had been led by the pale horse of death to the grave with great exultation. The other procession was led by the living Lord, who only has immortality. And as life and death met, the battle was short and decisive, and death fled from the gates of the city. Going on in verse 14, then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. Jesus stops the funeral procession as they are leaving the city. Men are carrying the open coffin to the graveyard to bury the coffin. Notice that the men who are carrying the coffin, they stand still. Luke doesn't state that they lowered the coffin down to the ground. They could have been either carrying the coffin at arm's length, or they might have been carrying it up on their shoulders. Again, Luke doesn't tell us. But they are carrying the coffin, they stop, and Jesus tells the man to arise. Going on in verse 15. So he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he presented him to his mother. Jesus presented this dead man, her son, now to his mother who is alive. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. What do you think the reaction was of the men carrying the coffin when this dead man sits up and starts talking? Verse 16, we will read, tells us that fear came upon them all. So did the 6 men start saying, did they drop the coffin? Because here's this man who was dead, all of a sudden sits up and starts talking. Or did they lower the coffin down and jump back? What kind of reaction would you have if you were one of those, pallbearers? Now, I think Jesus, that this man, when he sat up, that Jesus had him talk. So they wouldn't think that it was just some type of reaction for a dead body. I had a friend who had a small pilot license, small plane pilot license, however you put it. And he was telling me that, they have to have so many hours per month in order to keep their license. And he said that he would try to pick up odd jobs to help pay for his fuel and everything so he could get his hours in. And one of the jobs that he had was to fly cadavers from one city to another. And all they were in was just in the plastic body bags. That's how he would carry them. And he could have one or two or three, depending on where he was going. And the first flight that he ever took, he was never told how the atmospheric pressures affected the bodies. And, every 30 feet that you go up in the air or you go down in the sea is an atmospheric pressure. And he said he was taking off with his first plane ride of a dead body, and all of a sudden he hears this plastic moving around in the back, and he turns around, and the body sat up and freaked him out, He didn't know if it was a joke or what, but he found out that the atmospheric pressure affects the bodies, the fluids or gases or whatever in their bodies, and it caused this body to sit up. And so in order so that the people, at this funeral did not think that this was something weird going on, possessed or whatever, the body sits up, the boy sits up and turns to his mother and talks to her, which I'm sure was freaking out enough. But to calm the scene, I would think. Okay? So the people standing around this funeral procession who was about to lay this man into the ground, all of the disciples that followed Jesus from Capernaum, and those who followed to see what Jesus will do next, they all praise and glorify God for the miracle that he has just performed. This story and maybe others spread all around the region. Jesus turned this funeral procession of sadness and loss into a glorifying of life's celebration. Jesus has crossed the line with this miracle. So far, all of his miracles dealt with the living, turning water into wine, healing the various sicknesses, and carrying in the catching of 2 boatloads full of fish. But now Jesus has crossed over into Satan's realm and has raised the dead. To them, it is an amazing, miraculous miracle, but to us as Christians, we see that Jesus has defeated death. He has defeated Satan. They do not understand the implications of what Jesus has just done in front of them. They don't understand the hold that Satan had on them and all who died up to this point. That was the one and only thing Satan had on the living, their death. Once they were dead, but not anymore. Jesus has the power over the dead. He can raise them from the dead to have life. Yes, there were others in the Old Testament that were raised from the dead, but this act by Jesus is a marker for a greater miracle to come after his own death. Jesus will only raise 3 people during his short ministry. This, of course, is the first one, the young man who has been dead for just a couple of days and is on his way to the gravesite. In 2 weeks, we will look at the next chapter in Luke, and we will look at miracle number 15, where Jesus raises the dead daughter of Jairus, who was dead, who had just died. Then the miracle that we are all familiar with is the raising of Lazarus, who had been dead for a few days, to the point that he was stinking. Okay? But then the 4th act will be the greatest of them all and will have the greatest meaning when Jesus is raised from the dead himself. Going on to the 12th miracle, we find in Matthew 8, verses 23 to 27. Now, when he had got into a boat, his disciples followed him. And I want us to look at our map again. And we saw here where we were down here in Nain. And he's going to travel up here to the Sea of Galilee. Again, this is the same day. And we don't know exactly where he is going. But we do know that he's going to the lake in order to get into a boat. Now we're looking a little bit closer. We'll see this in the next reading where he is going, but he is going to be going up here to what is called Gergesenes, on the other side of the lake. And we see that right here. So we don't know if he's going to be coming out of Tiberias, because they say to the other side of the lake, the other side of the sea. So that would be there. Or if they'd go from where they're at down here to the bottom of the sea and come up that way. Again, it doesn't matter where, but we know that they're getting into the boats to go across the Sea of Galilee. Continuing on. Now when he got into a boat, his disciples followed him, and suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with the waves. But Jesus was asleep. Then his disciples came to him and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." But he said to them, "Why are you fearful, O you of little faith?" Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, "Who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Have you ever been so tired and worn out to the point that you just can't keep your eyes open no matter what? Well, this is what has happened to Jesus. He has had a full day. He has walked the 30 miles down to Nain, dealing with the crowds of people following him. He's raised the man from death, and now he's walked back up to the sea, and he's getting into the boat, and it says it's at evening, so he's had a full day. He's tired. He grabs a pillow, he climbs into the back of the boat, lays down, he goes to sleep. Now, I'm sure that's part of this plan of what's going on with this miracle, because if Jesus had been awake and had seen it, they'd all be looking at him like, "Lord, what are you going to do?" But instead, he's asleep to see how they handle it. But the waves are crashing over the side of the boat. The storm is so bad that they don't know what to do. And remember, they're fishermen. They've had to deal with this all their life. But this storm is so bad, and the waves are crashing over the sides of the boat, that they panic. All right? O ye of little faith. Going on to verse 35. This is Mark 4. Starting in verse 35 to verse 41, we read of Mark's account. On the same day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was. And other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat onto the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Now, Mark gives us a little bit more information on this story than Matthew did. Mark states that in the middle of verse 36 that they took Jesus along in the boat as he was. Now, when we read over that, we might just look at that and just kind of read over it. Jesus as he was. But of course, the scholars, they're going to tear this down. And when they see this, he was, they look at it that Jesus was tired. Jesus was worn out from his day's activities. All that walking, the healing, and the walking again and getting in the boat. He's just worn out, and he lays down, grabs a pillow, and falls asleep. But they're saying that he was, meaning that he was tired. He was worn out. Again, the scriptures do not tell us. It just uses the phrase that he was. And we see here that Jesus has gone to the stern of the boat. And I don't know how much nautical knowledge that you have, but the stern is also called the aft, and that is the rear of the boat. The port side is real easy to know because port has 4 letters. Left side has 4 letters. So the left side of the boat is the port side, which makes the right side the starboard. The bow is the front of the boat, and then the stern or the aft is the rear of the boat. So Jesus has gone to the back of the boat, which is usually going to be the more calm area of the boat, to fall asleep, and he's out. He is out, and this huge storm picks up. Waves are crashing in, but Jesus is asleep. Going on in verse 39. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Peace, be still. That was all that was needed from Jesus to calm the storm and the crashing sea. Peace, be still. And immediately the winds and the waves obeyed his command. Now, the commentary that I'm reading states that the way the mountains are on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, that they have what I call finger ridges, and there are troughs, and the wind coming down off the mountains get into those troughs and just really funnel the wind really strong. And they will have storms just pop up unexpectedly, and they're so strong with those tunnels of wind blowing down that it will blow the waves up and over the sides of boats. Okay? And most of the boats back then, of course, are open. They're not like today where they're closed in and can take some waves. But we see here that these storms have affected Jesus and the men, and they have come on to them. We're so strong. But all after Jesus says, Peace, be still, all was quiet and still and calm. The word that Mark uses here is to be still, which means to be muzzled or to be gagged. Now, some think that the water holds demons, holds evil demons. And it could be possible that the devil was mad at Jesus because of him just raising the dead. And so the devil is getting back at Jesus and trying to kill him while he's asleep and unaware of what is going on. Okay, and again, that's just what some scholars think. I've known, talking to missionaries, that the people in Kenya, in Africa, believe that Lake Victoria, which borders their property on the southwest corner, that Lake Victoria is full of evil spirits. Okay? And so there are people who believe that today, that the water contains evil spirits. But Jesus asked the men in the boat why they were so scared or fearful. You should know my powers by now. You've witnessed me raising the dead just earlier today. You have seen me heal the sick. You have seen me cast out demons. I have made the lame walk. You should know by now my powers. You should know by now that I can calm the winds and the waves. Why is it that you don't have any faith in me? The men cowering in the boat had to be embarrassed by their actions, but they still don't get it. They still don't understand who this man is, that he can do all of these things even after they have seen his powers. Now let's look at Luke's account in chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." And they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, with a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. The commentary that I again read talks about these high winds coming down. But again, we see here that the boats are filling with water and that their lives are in jeopardy. Going on in verse 24, and they came to him and awoke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. But he said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, "Who can this be? For he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." "Master, Master, we are perishing. Save us." Notice in that all three recordings of the story that the men tried to maneuver the boat to safety by themselves. Then when they fail, they yell to Jesus to save them. Jesus awakes, he looks around and utters the words, "Peace, be still." Three simple words, "Peace, be still." And immediately everything is calm. It's not like the storm, it moves away and it starts, getting down. The winds start easing off and the rain eases off and everything. No. Jesus says, peace be still. The wind stopped, the rain stopped, the waves stopped. It is still. They know that Jesus has control over the winds and the waves. It wasn't that the storm passed away. They were afraid of the storm sinking their boat and them drowning. But then in a blink of an eye, they were amazed at the power of this man that they were following. The power this man has over sickness and death. And now he controls the winds and the waves with 3 simple words. Peace, be still. Let us wrap up our time this morning in God's Word with bringing two short stories, these two short miracles, into the current day and apply them to ourselves. In our first miracle this morning, Jesus had walked all day south to the city of Nain with a group of disciples and other followers. For what reason? Jesus knows the reason. He has a schedule to maintain if he is to meet his funeral procession leaving the city of Nain. His followers don't know what to expect, but they follow him anyways. Do you feel sometimes that you don't know where you are headed as a Christian? Where is your life taking you? Why are you doing the same thing over and over again? Please don't lose sight of Jesus. Don't lose sight of what he has for you. If they had taken their eyes off of him, then they would have been lost in more ways than one. The same is true if we take our eyes off of Jesus. We will be lost without Jesus. We must follow Jesus even though we don't know where that path is going to take us. We must follow Jesus even though we pray and we don't see the answer right away. When I was in the Air Force, Kathy and I always prayed that the Lord would send us where he needed us, wherever that was. And then we got orders to Iceland. And it's like, okay, Lord, you have a reason for this. And the first year there, we didn't really see anything. But then everybody that was there had gotten orders and had left. And it was just Kathy, myself, and our 3 girls, Joanne and her 3 children. And that was it. And we held the church together during that time frame. And there was times that I had to work on Sunday, and it was just Kathy and Joanne and the kids, And they would have somebody come in, TDY, which is just a temporary duty assignment, and there'd be a guy, and they would look at him and say, "You've got it today, you're the man." But then when we left 12 months later, the church of 6 people had grown to 75. And a man had come in. His wife was going to be head of the commissary in BX, and he was an I can't say ex-preacher, but he wasn't preaching at the time, and he took over my place as preaching. And like I said, we had 75 people. And so looking back, we could see where, we prayed, God, send us where you need us. And he needed us there at that time to keep the church going in Iceland. So just because we say the prayer today, God, give me guidance, God, help me, doesn't mean it's going to happen today. God will use you when he needs you and where he needs you. But we can't lose sight of that. We can't lose hope in God. Our second miracle this morning was the calming of the winds and the waves. You probably know where I'm going to go with this miracle. How many times when the storms of life hit you like a hurricane or a tornado that you think selfishly that you can handle it on your own? Just like the men on the boat. Don't wake Jesus. He's tired. He needs his sleep. We can handle this. We're fishermen. We know how to deal with a boat. And they struggle and they struggle, and then they realize they can't. Then we fall on our knees when we try to do it ourselves, and we ask Jesus for help. Jesus tells the winds and the waves and the storm in our life, peace, be still. Then we realize our own shortcomings. Where is your own faith? It is easy to sit there and read about these early disciples and see their shortcomings, but it's hard for us to look in the mirror and truly look at ourselves and see our own failings, our own shortcomings, our own shortness of faith. But Jesus is always there. Jesus is always there to calm our storms. But we've got to let him in, to let him to do that. That's the same thing these men did. They tried to take care of it themselves, but they couldn't. And then when they finally feared for their lives at the hands of the storm, they went to God and they asked Jesus, please, Lord, help us. And he gets up and he says, peace, be still. But then turns to them and said, where is your faith? O ye of little faith, why didn't you have faith in me? You have seen what I have done. We have read what Jesus is capable of. We have read what Jesus has done in the scriptures. Why don't we go to him when we have our own storms in our life to deal with? We face that same decision every time that we have a storm in our life. We need to go to God first and not try and fix our storms by ourselves. We have God in our life, and we need to get into the habit of going to him in prayer and asking for his help, his guidance, his comfort. Asking for help isn't a one-time thing or event like you see on TV and game shows to where they have a lifeline that they can call somebody or ask somebody in the audience for help on a hard question. No, our lifeline, our help from Jesus is not a one-time offer. We can go to Jesus as many times as we need to, as many times as we find ourselves struggling, as many times as we need to. But we need to be willing to go to Jesus in prayer and ask for the help. Go to Jesus in prayer and say, Lord, I need you. I need you, Lord. But are you willing to do that? That's what I want you to take from this second lesson this morning, from the second miracle, is that we need to realize in our life when we are struggling that we need God. We need his help. We need the help of our family. Scriptures tell us that when we have problems, to bring it to our brothers and sisters and get the encouragement and the prayers that we need from them, from each other. If there's any way that we can help you this morning with that, do you have a struggle that you need prayers for? Let us know. Let us help. Or maybe you haven't put Christ on in baptism yet, and that is something that you need to do. The baptistry is ready. We are here to take care of that sin problem this morning so that you can have God on your side to help you throughout your life, however long that is or however short that is. But God is there for us. Let him help you as together we stand and sing.